Hello, everyone, and welcome to Definitely Gospel Centered. I am your host, Gabby Duke, and here we strive to have real, honest, deep conversations in American Sign Language. And today we have an amazing guest with us, and her name is Emma Faye. She is, first off, an amazing human being, and is also the founder of an organization by the name of Aid the Silent. Aid the Silent seeks to support deaf and hard of hearing children in many different ways, such as going to their audiologist appointments or receiving their first hearing aids. And recently, she's been involved in a pageant, and I'm sorry, is it Miss USA
or pageant like this for the banner, and then of course the crown.
And you're hoping to be the first deaf contestant or winner, correct?
Yes. So in the past, there was a deaf woman who won the Miss America pageant, and that was Heather Whitestone.
Yes.
And Heather Whitestone was a deaf dancer. And so I tried out for the American competition first, and then I was the first deaf Miss San Antonio. And then I almost won the pageant for Miss Texas. It was really close, but I didn't quite win. So now I'm trying out for a different system, and it's similar to the other competitions, but it's called Miss USA, and there's never been a deaf Miss USA. There's also never been a deaf person to represent the state of Texas for this competition. And so I'm trying to pursue that goal again, just because growing up as a young girl, a young deaf girl, I always looked up to Heather Whitestone as a role model. She was a dancer, she was deaf, and I thought, I want to become like her. I want to become Miss America too. So now as an adult, I want to try to pursue that dream again.
That is so cool. Just awesome. Being able to have that role model growing up to, see a deaf woman in that position for the first time. That's just so great.
Yeah. The first one. So the first example was the woman, Heather. And when I saw that she won, I thought, wow, I just wanted to become like her,
So for you then, growing up, were you born deaf or hard of hearing? Were you the first in your family? What was that like?
So I was identified as deaf later at the age of 3 years old.
Okay.
When I was born, at that time, they didn't have early intervention for testing hearing loss.
Right.
And so, I don't know, maybe I was born deaf, but they suspect that I got a high fever, and as a result of that sickness, I became deaf around the age of 3. Then, when I was about 4, I received my first set of hearing aids, and then immediately after that, I was placed into speech therapy. So I was in speech therapy for 10 years, and then later, when I was 16, I started to learn sign language. So it was in high school when I finally started to pick it up.
Wow, okay.
And yes, I was 16 years old when I started to learn sign.
So did you take a class? Did the school provide a class in ASL to teach, or how did you learn?
Yeah, so at my school, the school that I attended was a small private school in a small town. And so they didn't have educational support for deaf students. So within the education system, I didn't have support. But my parents advocated and fought for me. And they had to be the ones to provide me with the resources and the accessibility that I needed. I entered into high school. The high school forced me to learn Spanish. They said I needed to learn Spanish.
Really? How funny is that?
It was an awful experience. I mean, it was terrible because it was just like the teacher would embarrass me. Oftentimes the teacher would force me to stand up in front of the class and try to speak in Spanish. And then I had to listen to these audio recordings, and the answers on the tests relied on the audio recordings that I was supposed to listen to. So I'd have to listen and then the answers were all based on those recordings. So everything just went right past me in that class. And the teacher was rude and unkind to me. And so I just had a bad experience with that Spanish class. And as a result, I went to the school board and requested that they please provide a language for the deaf students at that school. I told them I need to learn ASL, I need sign language, and I need to learn about deaf culture. Spanish was never going to work for me. I was never going to learn Spanish. It never happened. And so I started to learn ASL. I signed on with Bill Vickers' Life Print program.
Yes. Very familiar.
And so I signed up for Bill Vickers' California Community College class. And I would watch the class live. And I would FaceTime with the teacher. It was a cool experience, and I think that I had Bill Vickers' wife as my teacher, I'm pretty sure.
That's so cool. So you've been learning ASL since high school, right? Were you able to find a deaf community around that time as well?
Yeah, so when I got to college, during that time, I really wanted to start an organization for deaf children. So that's where my heart was, but I had no idea where to learn sign language, and I didn't feel like I knew enough at that time. I knew the basics because I had taken the online class, but I wasn't fully immersed into the culture. I needed to immerse myself within the deaf community and learn the culture and become familiar with that. And so I started to go out to dinner with a deaf friend of mine that I had met at an event. And so, actually what happened was I saw a deaf guy at a coffee shop and I was super nervous, but I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, I need a deaf friend and I need to learn sign language and to improve my skills. So would you please be willing to go and teach me at different restaurants?" And so what we would do is every week we would pick a different restaurant, and this guy, my deaf friend, would teach me signs from off the menus that we were ordering from at these different restaurants. And so later I began to go to a church that had a large interpreting group there. And that was a church in San Antonio. And it was a hearing church, but it was very deaf friendly. There were a lot of deaf members who attended. So I began to hang out with them. We would go out to dinner and I would invite them over to my house. And so that's really when I began to pick up sign language. But I immediately learned ASL very quickly when I started to serve in a deaf teen group where I was serving deaf students. And I really had to learn sign language quickly there because they are not going to be slow and patient with you. They were fast.
Right.
And, they knew all of the
they sign incredibly fast.
Popular cultural phrases and things like that. So from serving in that group, I learned very quickly. I had to pick it up. I was kind of just thrown into it. And so it was like a crash course. I just had to fall right into it and learn very quickly.
Yeah, I feel like my experience is very similar. When I started becoming more involved in deaf community, and especially in deaf ministry, and seeing other people sign, I desperately wanted to improve my own language. So I completely understand it takes a lot of practice, but the challenge was so good for me in my experience. So you went to church growing up in high school.
So it was during
you were exposed
college.
to interpreting services.
So a lot later.
College, okay. So a little bit later than high school. Do you feel like, when was it you really learned about God, and when did you become saved? Was it during college?
High school.
Or before?
Yeah, it was in high school. So I knew who Jesus was, and I knew a lot about God, but there were still things I wasn't clear on. I didn't understand what grace was, and so growing up, I didn't have interpreters, and I wasn't exposed to sign language. And so the only resources that were often provided to me were the interpreters at church. So if you're deaf but you don't know sign language, it can be very isolating, or you have limited options for where you can go to learn sign. And back then, I didn't have internet, And so I couldn't get involved in a deaf support group or even a deaf Christian support group. There was none of that. So my parents knew Jesus, but I didn't have a personal relationship with him.
Yeah. Right.
So I didn't fully understand the gospel. I began attending a private Christian school, but I still didn't fully understand the gospel there either. So the knowledge was there in my head, but it didn't connect to my heart.
Yeah.
And I really needed
exactly.
that. So about the time I was 14, I went to a church camp, and it was not a deaf camp. But while I was there, I had a personal one-to-one leader who would teach me different things, and she would write things out to keep it visual for me. And so that leader was willing to sit with me one-on-one and take the time to write things out.
Yeah,
and,
wow.
So that's really when I accepted Jesus and developed a relationship with him. So that's when I got saved. But as far as deep discipleship and really having deep discussions about God's word and the Bible, that began when I attended a Young Life camp. And there was a leader at that camp who was willing, although she was not deaf herself and she didn't sign and the camp wasn't necessarily deaf friendly, she was willing to sit with me one-on-one and teach me different things. So her and I would meet every week and we would have Bible studies, but it would always be in a quiet environment, in a peaceful place. And we would have deep conversations and discussions about God. So that was really the first time in my life that someone deeply pursued after me. And that leader was the first person who was involved in my life who taught me that God would be willing to use my story. She said, God will use your story. You being deaf or going through different struggles will not hinder him from using your story. And when she said that to me, it was just like, wow, I really, really started to think. And I started to trust God more and more. And so about that time, I was 16 years old, and it was during the same time that I had just begun to learn ASL. And so I just started to pick up on sign language. And when that leader said that, I feel like God used her in my life just to tell me that I would establish something big for him to help other people who have gone through similar things that I've gone through. People who have struggled just like I have growing up. And so the idea was that God may use me to be an advocate for other deaf people who have gone through similar experiences. And I had this dream, this big dream, that I would establish an organization like that, and it eventually led to the establishment of Aid the Silent. And a lot of times people question the title, Aid the Silent, and they have negative comments about the word silent and think that I shouldn't have that in the title. But there's a verse in the Bible that talks about providing a voice for people who don't have a voice. And the word voice in the Bible is not necessarily talking about an audible or physical voice. It's talking about providing representation for people who don't have anyone to represent them. And so my role within my organization isn't to hand out hearing aids and teach people how to speak. My role is to give people equal accessibility and to allow them to thrive. And really the priority is to provide equal accessibility to the gospel and to the word of God. So it's about giving the power to those people, empowering them to step into the power that God has provided for each and every one of us so that they can step into their purpose, their God-given purpose for their life.
Yes.
So that's why
Amen.
It's called Aid the Silent, because it's about empowering people to step into their God-given purpose for their life.
Yes, I agree 100%. You know, he allowed you to be deaf and is planning to use your deafness. And, you know, it looks like he's already started using it, obviously, with your work in Aid the Silent and, you know, just supporting other deaf individuals. And I just think that's just such an amazing example of how God uses the things in our life. So in your journey with your organization, Aid the Silent, and also this new campaign, I guess I should say, called Clear to Be Clear.
Yeah.
Would you mind, telling us a little bit about that? Because it seems like you're fighting for access with that campaign. We'd just love to hear it.
We had no money. We had no resources. Nothing. And so it was just amazing, really, to see how God just provided everything that we needed. So we started out with no money, but I was still advertising and marketing and, inviting people to please give and donate to our ASL classes, to camps and things like that. But I had no money, and so I was making all of these commitments, but I didn't have any resources to back it up. So I had to fully trust in God to provide everything that we needed. And about a month later, after we had just established the organization, maybe 2 months later, one of the donors gave us $5,000, and that was all we had, just $5,000. So when I realized that's how much that we had, I'm thinking one set of hearing aids cost that amount. So I thought, what am I going to do with just $5,000? I don't have enough money for all these different things. Mm-hmm. And so I prayed about it and asked God, how are we going to use this amount of money as a leverage to basically grow our organization to become something bigger? So I prayed about that. And then we developed a marketing campaign called Show Your Aids, show your hearing aids or your cochlear implant. And so the idea behind the campaign was that a person would take a selfie of them with their hearing aids or with their cochlear implant and post them on their social media platform. Just to say, I'm deaf, I'm proud to be deaf. And we sold the pictures starting at $5 each and then going all the way up to $5,000. So that's how I used that little bit amount of money to really spread and increase the amount that we had. And then that campaign really started to make an impact internationally, and the hashtag started to trend. So the hashtag again was Show Your Aids. And then we had new exposure, new donors, new people getting involved as a result of the hashtag becoming so popular. So we started very small, and then I was just willing to offer the little bit amount that we had to God. And then in return, he just brought the increase and contacted so many people throughout the world. It just reached so many people. Oh, I lost my earring.
Yes. Wow. That story just about, in the Bible, the 5 loaves and 2 fishes and how the Lord just multiplies. What a great reminder,
so time that our hashtag
He
was
took that
$5,000
and God showed up with so much more. I think that's just astounding.
The services that we were providing. So while we were getting so many new donors, we were also getting new applications from children, from children's families who wanted our services. And so about a year ago, we were 5 years in running, and we had around 229 children who were receiving resources from us. Resources like ASL programs, information about different Christian camps for the deaf and things like that. And so many different children and teens are a part of our organization now, and it's really beautiful to see. But now we're working with trying to get clear masks, which is really cool. I mean, it's a crazy time, but again, this is just a God story because I had a bad experience with the mask situation. Just having everybody's faces covered up, it's difficult for me to understand and communicate with people. And so there's so many different challenges that have happened ever since the masks have been mandated.
I know,
and a lot
so
of
challenging.
things are not really fair to the deaf community, but one experience that I had specifically, I can recall, I went to the gym.
I agree.
And the gym that I go to had just recently changed the rules at this time. So when I arrived, I had invited a friend to come with me. I don't like to go to the gym by myself. It's so lonely and isolating. So I always ask a friend to come with me. But again, they changed the rules at my gym and they changed the time, but they don't post it on their website. And so I had no idea that they had changed the rules, and I can't call to figure that out. And so they really should make it accessible on the website about the new rules that they have just recently put into place, but they didn't do that. And so I get there, had no idea about the changes. And the woman who worked there was just so rude and awful to me. She refused to take her mask off, even if we were standing 6 feet apart. Mm-hmm. She wouldn't help me to communicate. She talked with my friend about me to my friend and said, oh, tell your friend later about the new rules and, tell her that she's not allowed to come in. I'm an independent person. I could have done it myself and communicated myself, but she didn't treat me that way. And so before, she was just rude to me when I initially walked in. But then she began to be against my rights because I pay for this service to come to the gym. It costs money. It's not free. And I come very often. But she wouldn't allow me to have access to what I had already paid for. And she wasn't willing to type or write it out or anything. She would not explain herself to me, and she wouldn't even take her mask off if we were standing 6 feet apart. And so later on, I shared a video basically just venting about what had happened to me and laying it all out about why I feel that this COVID crisis has really negatively impacted the deaf community. And it's just like taken away the human connection, and it gives people an opportunity to be rude and unkind, people who are not willing to meet you in the middle and try to communicate with you. So she was not willing to do that with me. And I posted that vlog, and it started to get very popular. People were sharing it a lot on Facebook. And after that happened and it started to gain more popularity, I knew that I had to provide a solution to that problem. And so I found out that there are some people who were selling clear masks. And I started to go through the process of trying to contact different people to help me start doing that as well. And so I think we've sold about 4,000 clear masks now. Yeah, 4,000. So it's really been amazing because in the beginning it started with this sad story.
Amazing.
I was so broken up about it. I felt
That's so good.
alone. And now that story has developed into just this beautiful just movement. And I've been able to change it into a positive experience and try to give that human communication connection back, being able to see each other's faces with the clear masks. I miss everything about everyday life before COVID happened. The deaf community is so interactive and we love to be face-to-face, and so I really miss that connection. But it is a happy story in the end because we have sold a lot of masks and we're welcoming back that human connection that we've all missed. We've really missed it. I miss people.
Yes, I agree. So many people are having this issue, because everyone's wearing their mask, right? And there are so many clear masks available, and that's so needed for connectivity for deaf people, but also for hard of hearing people, the older generation that's struggling to understand.
They need to see their teachers' faces at school in order to understand clearly. So there's a lot of different problems to solve. But I believe strongly that I can't just be angry and combative at a situation and just say, oh, well, this isn't fair and there's no access. I need to identify those problems and then also provide a solution to those problems. I need to be a joyful representation of Christ. And if I'm just angry all the time and upset and mad at the world and just hate everything, then I really won't be representing Jesus well. So in order to show his character, I have to be an advocate and I have to be supportive of providing solutions to problems that I notice. That way, when you do identify a problem and something that is negative, but you can add a solution to that problem, then it provides a positive outcome to it.
I agree. Mm-hmm.
I have to provide a solution or I'm not representing Christ well. I can't represent him while being so negative. What it means to represent Jesus is to be kind, to be approachable, easy to talk with, not quick to get angry. I have to be slow to anger. I have to be patient and understanding and willing to communicate with people and meet people in the middle. Just find middle ground.
I love that. I think I'm learning these things as well, that we have to be consistently teaching our hearing peers, about different things, like how do they support deaf individuals, or the, common question, where do they learn ASL, or even how they can communicate without ASL on a phone or on a piece of paper, writing back and forth. And then other things like, lighting is so important, and an interpreter is so important, and like all these things. And I think often meaning that in that teaching, the Lord teaches me how to be patient
but you
with
have
other
to be
people.
Patient because oftentimes we have to remind ourselves that people have not necessarily walked through our experiences, and they don't necessarily understand our perspective on life, and they've never experienced what it's like to be deaf and to have this crisis now where masks are mandated and communication is a lot more difficult than it used to be for us. And so, it's hard to educate people, but my heart right now is sad when I look at what's going on with the church.
Right, exactly.
Another part of my responsibility within my job is I work with the state, and it's a government job with the community abbot, and so I am on the committee that represents people with disabilities, specifically deaf people, to provide accessibility to them. And so it's hard to see that the secular world is really up to date on providing accessibility and inclusion to people with disabilities, but the church is behind on that. They're like 30 years behind on that. And I just want the church to come on, just wake up. We have to have, as a church, a heart for people with disabilities. That is in the Bible. Oftentimes we see examples in the Bible. The man who couldn't walk, the blind man, the deaf man, or the woman who had the issue of blood, who was ill.
Gosh, yes.
These are all examples of people who had disabilities, and Jesus had a heart for them. And so I want to say to the church, come on and wake up and catch up. Because in a way, they're missing the point. And so really my biggest challenge is for the church. I'm going to be a bit more tough on the church because Jesus. You have his word. His heart. And so please just wake up and come on and catch up. Yeah, so it is sad to see, but
yes. No, you're exactly right. I agree 110%. I think I have a very similar experience as you. And for whatever reason, the church just struggles with that concept, this concept of deaf participation and inclusion within their own congregation. Not something separate, but something as just another part of the church. It's Jesus's heart. He loves deaf people. And yes, exactly. So Emma, I want to know
especially
I guess I should ask if you have any encouragement to give to people that are struggling to accept their deafness, or trying to see how God will
whether
use
you
that.
belong in the deaf community or the hearing community. And in the past, I experienced that. I didn't know which family I belonged to. But I love that Jesus promises that the biggest family, the most important family that we belong to is his. And so accept that you're a bridge maker. So if you have involvement within the hearing community and involvement within the deaf community, you can be a bridge maker and merge those two communities together. You can be an advocate for the deaf, but also remember that Jesus is the only place you will truly find satisfaction and belonging in. And so we can look all over the world to try and figure out where we belong. Where do I fit as a deaf person? And you won't be able to find that until you accept first that your identity lies in Jesus, and that is where you belong, and that is where your family is. And then secondly, your deaf culture is put into place. For me, Jesus is first. My deaf culture must come second. So Jesus culture first, deaf culture second.
Yes, for sure.
If something within the deaf community conflicts with my beliefs about Jesus, then I have to pick Jesus first. I have to place Jesus at the forefront. He must be my priority. And then after Jesus, secondly, comes my identity as a deaf person and my involvement within the deaf community. I'm excited about that.
I agree.
But first, I'm a daughter of the Most High King Jesus. And that is my identity first. And then after that comes my deafness.
Yes, I love how you've put that, Emma. Such truth. I think you're absolutely right. Even in my own experience in my journey of figuring out these things, we realize that we're on a search for family. I have a hearing family all my life, but I have deaf friends that are like family, and I'm deaf, but also I'm a believer. So much to figure out and navigate. And when you finally realize that Jesus comes first, his family comes first, your identity is in him and in his family. I just love that reminder. Thank you for sharing that, Emma. And thank you so much for coming on this podcast and having these real, honest conversations just about your life and your organization. So excited to have you here today. Yes, absolutely. All of you guys that are watching today, thank you for joining. And if you do have any questions, maybe about Emma and her organization, or maybe just about Christ or something in the Bible, or just life questions as you navigate deaf identity or your own personal journey, whatever those questions may be, please don't hesitate to send me an email, send a comment on Instagram or Facebook. We'll be responding to those. So again, thank you all for joining this episode of Definitely Gospel Centered, where we have deep conversations in ASL. Hopefully, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Bye-bye, y'all. Love you guys.